Thanks everyone for being here. If you've not come to one of these before and you don't know who I am, my name is Barry Cranford. I'm the organizer of a bunch of different tech communities in London. One of those is the London CTOs. And about a year ago, or just over a year ago, we started running a series of events called the CTO Lunch Club. It started off with like 4 or 5 people coming each week, and it grew and grew and grew. And it became this really cool place. Now got about 50 people come each week, where people come along, meet other people, and build a network really quickly and talk about something interesting in the CTO world. I was talking to Sam, been working with Sam and Turntable for 4 or 5 years now. And we were saying, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if there was something in the financial services tech space that was similar? So we started the FS Tech Coffee Club, and that is what this is here today. So we'll be sending out a form, sharing a form on there, and it's very much just an interesting conversation and a chance to meet other people who share those interests. So feel free, put your LinkedIn details down, connect with other people that you want to connect with. Yeah, I hope you have a great time. Got a great panel here for you. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our host, Sam Moorhouse.
Thanks, Barry. Hi, everyone. Yeah, we do have a great panel for you today, and we'll get to introductions really shortly, but I'll just start right at the very top and introduce myself. My name's Sam Moorhouse, and I run a software company called Turntabl. We're based in London and in Accra in Ghana. But today we're here to talk about platform engineering in financial services, and we're going to start right at the top with definitions, but firstly, I'd like to go to introductions. So our panel here today is Naz, Leena, and Federico, and I'll ask them to start by introducing themselves, and then we're going to go straight to Naz for the first question. So go ahead. You're on mute, mate. Naz, you're still on mute.
What was the mute difficulty to start with? So I'm Naz Quadri, currently the CTO at Princeton Equity. I have probably spent close to 30 years in financial services technology and AI. I'm happy to share all of my mistakes and learnings over that time.
I suppose I'll go next. I'm Leena Mooneeram. I'm a senior platform engineer. I'm currently working at Chainalysis, who are the data platform for the blockchain, but I've been in and out of financial services organizations as a software engineer, and for the last 6 years, approximately, as a platform engineer.
All right.
Thanks, Leena. Federico.
Yeah. So my name is Federico. I work for Wise. I'm a staff engineer. I'm a staff SRE engineer at Wise. My background is consulting. I've been before Wise in consulting for many years across financial services in the UK, Europe, and Canada.
Thanks very much, Federico. And folks, this is a coffee club. The coffee isn't compulsory, but the vibe is right. So we're pretty kind of low key. If you are drinking coffee, you're welcome to join us. I drink trash coffee out of a nice mug. So this is my Ember mug. If you or a loved one is a fan of hot drinks, I strongly recommend an Ember mug. It's got a little heating element in the bottom, so it'll keep your drink warm. I promise there is no sponsorship, although I'm about to make a bid for sponsorship from Ember. Strong recommend for a Christmas present.
You do have to take out a small mortgage, though, don't you, for the Ember mugs?
My wife bought me an Ember mug, and I haven't asked her how much it was, but ultimately it's kind of a shared cost. You're absolutely right. Folks, we're really relaxed about questions, so if you want to come off mute, it's a group of the right size. Feel free to jump in. You'll notice Barry's also put something in the chat as well, so please feel free to jump in there and share your details during or after the call. If you want to ask questions, you can either come off mute, raise your hand, put something in the chat, and I promise we'll get back to you. So firstly, I want to speak to Naz, and I want to hear your definition of a platform. So is it a product? Is a platform a collection of tools? And ultimately, what's the problem that we're trying to solve through platforms?
So let's take a step back. We're all technologists here, and we have business users. They think that they are the center of the world, and all the stuff that is coming out of technology is for them to go and make money and do cool things and get out there in the world. We have to take a slightly different view. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong, but we have to put the developer at the center of the world. I know that I could give Sam a Java compiler and a C++ compiler and give him Vim, and he's off to the races. He's going to go and build code. But the reality is it's not that efficient. Sam won't just be building code. He's got to write tests. He's got to set up infrastructure. He's got to make sure this is well permissioned. he's got to be able to create a development environment which is separated from production so he can go and run some crazy tests, which are probably going to fail. He'll throw them on the carpet and try again and again and again till he's successful. Sam also wants to knock off at 5. Let's say 5, could be earlier, could be later, I'm not sure. He wants to go down the pub and he wants to be able to, from his phone, look at how the build's progressing, look at how the tests have gone, make some notes for himself. What do I actually have to go and do tomorrow? So to have this ability, this platform, which allows him to be super effective, and I think we'll get to this later, happy. Right? So I don't look at it as, look, let's make a set of bullet points and then that is a platform. It's what makes developers the most effective and happy in doing the job that they need to do, which quite frankly, the business owners don't often quite understand. So we have to be able to advocate for what that platform is.
It's true. I do want to be happy. And I appreciate you thinking about me, Naz. I was thinking about definitions earlier because we had a prep call and I think when we were talking around the topic, we had a little bit of trouble coming up with a definition for what platforms are, right? And one of the things I thought is to define it by what it isn't. So anybody that's ever owned a build script, or anybody that's ever owned a script whose output is another script, which sets up a developer environment. Remember that the ratio of setting up a developer environment to using a developer environment is very, very high. You do the setup once. It's the same as onboarding documentation. You get the new person to write the documentation for the next person, but it never gets read that much. And I think there's something about engineers where we want to tidy up. The good ones want to tidy up and we want to go back after ourselves and spot the messy parts, the dirty parts, and do a better job. And for me, my feeling is that's where platforms have come from. Leena, I'd love to hear from you. How do we maybe talk about platform engineering as opposed to DevOps? In my mind, those are kind of similar spaces. Have you got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think platform engineering is a continuation of DevOps, and it builds on that kind of DevOps culture. In that, certainly my definition of platform engineering would include developer experience and would include the developer productivity parts, but it also includes perhaps the more conceptual customer focused side of approaching your platform as a product and thinking about engineers within an organization as your customers. So you approach them in the same ways you would external customers. Try and find out what they need. So a lot of the times platforms fail or are not as successful when you have platform engineers that build something that they think is useful, but really there is no internal market for. And I think the whole concept, and certainly the more mature concept of platform engineering, is very, very customer centric and very engineer centric. So make sure you know what your engineers want. Make sure you know that there is a problem to be solved before building some tool or buying in some tool to build that product or to build a platform or to contribute to the platform.
But how did it come to be a separate group? Why are we talking about platform engineering as opposed to just simply developers solving their own problems?
I think it comes with maturity. So as companies grow and as organizations grow, you don't want to be solving the same problem and reinventing the wheel at a team level or at an engineer level again and again and again, right? Because that's inefficient. And ultimately, I think most organizations are there to be profitable. And that is not profitable and it's certainly not efficient. And so part of the value of platform is actually as a multiplier. And I think we touched on the kind of return of investment, kind of very briefly earlier. But that's really where platforms add their value, is not necessarily directly to the bottom line, but as a multiplier for engineers and for other teams that they support.
Can I just
Federico,
jump in and add something? Because I mean, if you think about this, the idea of platforms is very old, right? So we had platforms with service catalogs in the 80s or in the 90s, where you would go and open a CI on ServiceNow or whatever tool you have back there, and they would generate some resources for you, right? So there's clearly been a generational approach to this, I think. The most recent idea what platforms are, the one that we're talking about right now, they have some defining characteristics that just weren't there before. The old ones, the ServiceNow of the world, were optimized for ops, whether the platforms we're building now are optimizing for development. We're optimizing for development and developers, not because we think that developers are better or worse. We think that we're optimizing for developers because it generates revenue for the company. That is the link. The link is developer productivity means the company makes more money, means that we can establish that link, which has been proven in a number of papers. I think there's a number of defining characteristics. Every company, I think that Sam mentioned, every company has a different way of understanding and defining their internal platforms. But there is a set of defining characteristics that define platforms in 2025 and over the past 5-10 years, which are everything from an internal developer portal to a service catalog, typically for Kubernetes or microservices, CI/CD, developer experience, security, guardrails, and controls. All of these make a modern platform. The idea of a platform has been there forever. We're now optimizing for developers, and we're optimizing because we think that investing in developer platforms means that the company makes more money, and we have that direct link, that connection there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think most organizations have a platform, whether they have a platform team or not. The most basic platform that you can have is good documentation, or even just some documentation that just perhaps make those efficiencies available to engineers. So it can be as basic as that. And the evolution is whether or not you choose to dedicate a team or individuals to that function and create, whether you have a platform team or something similar.
Similar to what people say about team culture, right? You have a culture whether you like it or not, and if you ignore it and you don't try and make the effort to shape it, then you'll get a bad one.
I'm going to add, Sam, I think there's been another evolution here, really magnified over the past few years, but it's been there for much, much longer, certainly in finance. We all know, let's just admit it, there are good developers, bad developers, really good developers, really bad developers. That's fine. It makes sense for a more central group that understands how to really make a build platform for them to use rather than them all trying to come to the median or somewhere in the upper quartile. But the reality is we've always in finance had these quant developers. Much more now you're seeing these machine learning developers come along, and they haven't been stewing in all of the problems that we as technologists have had to deal with. How should source code control work? Are unit tests important? The answer is yes. Are integration tests important? All of these things that we've discovered make software better, quicker, and easier to build. It's not their core competency. Building these platforms allows for them to take advantage of the mistakes we made in the past, what we learned from those, and what we put into the systems to help us in the future.
Super important point there, Naz, and I want us to talk about the idea of a golden path a little bit later on. If we can, there's just one thing I wanted to pick up, which I think Federico mentioned, about the developer experience versus the business outcomes. And if we're going to invest in a platform team, if we're going to do the work to improve the lot of developers, and thanks, Naz, make them happier, how do we justify that? Ultimately, we have to, right? So are we prioritizing for developer happiness, or do we actually have to come down to brass tacks and talk about KPIs? And I'd like to hear from maybe Leena and then Naz and Federico.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting that you've kind of framed it as an either or. I don't necessarily think that they're mutually exclusive. So I think certainly if you work and you optimize for a good developer experience and engineer happiness, so what you actually have then is you're working towards creating less friction for engineers, so they're able to kind of spin up services quicker and push code quicker. You're kind of limiting the context switching and the cognitive load for engineers, so that all contributes to a good developer experience. And you're allowing your engineers to focus on actually the business logic rather than all the boilerplate and all the structure that you need around delivering good code. And what that all does is actually contributes to your bottom line, right? It makes your code quicker to market. It makes your engineers able to be much more agile and much more responsive to kind of your product teams and what's coming in from the market. And that impacts as well. Then if you've got happy engineers, right, they're going to want to stay, right? So you're reducing your recruitment and your turnover, which also then can also impact if you've got these standardized platforms and standardized developer experience across your engineering org, you're able to kind of have your engineers move around from team to team much more quickly, because you're moving from a team that has a standard set of procedures to another team that has a very similar standard set of procedures. Whereas sometimes what I see in organizations, one team operates so completely differently to another team that you get siloed. And so you haven't got that agility within your engineering kind of resource. So I think absolutely they're not mutually exclusive. And I think a good developer experience contributes significantly to, key business outcomes.
So it's a really interesting point about friction-free movement between teams and enterprises. I think that's really, really important. Naz, how about it? Are we all moving to Bhutan and optimizing for happiness?
I'm a big believer in developer happiness. Why? Because I've been a developer for 30 years and still am. Let's turn this on its head a little bit. If I was to think of a company like a Google, why did they invest so much in platform engineering, in build platforms, even deployment platforms? We're all using Kubernetes today. Well, that all came out of Borg at Google when they decided this was an investment to make. And my gut is, I never worked at Google, but my gut is it's because the senior management there were technologists and they understood the pain of building technology, why it's hard and what you need to do to make it better. So I actually think this comes down, and I've had to play this role many a time, to having your most senior folks be hands-on enough, preferably more, to be able to engage with their business partners, to have the trust and confidence of them to say, you're making bets about this product or this market segment. I'm making bets about this investment internally into our groups. I can't give you exact numbers if you want me to give you this KPI and that one. But in the same way, I'm trusting that you're going to directionally get a benefit for the business by going into this direction. I need you to trust me that we're going to directionally get a benefit from going in this direction on the technology side.
Federico.
Yeah, no, I don't know, like I believe in numbers. So I think that if we are making huge investments into the developer experience, we should be able to prove to the business that by doing that, we increase our development velocity and we have our eyes. There's research that has been there for a number of years. In 2022, State of DevOps report from Puppet Labs, what was already mentioning that companies that are great at developer experience are making more money than others. So that is the connection. The connection is, and it's been proven in literature as well, from Puppet Labs to the Door reports. Every time you hear companies that have better documentation are making more money. They have higher revenue. They have an increased market cap. They have more revenue. So all of this has been proven as well. I think that as technologists, our role is to, especially at a certain level of seniority, our role is to understand what is the investment that we have to make here, build a business case around it, and link the investment to developer happiness into business outcomes and results. I don't think it's a or choice. We can achieve both happy developers and making money for the company, and we can tie that link there based on literature, based on what we found from McKinsey report. Everything is available online as well.
But there's just another point on developer happiness. I think sometimes the simplistic reading of it is developer happy, developer stay. Developer unhappy, developer leave. But it's a little more complex than this. Developers have friends. They go and have a pint and they chat to their friends who are also developers. And at some point they get to the conversation of the tools they're using. And there is this, I wish I could change my Python version. There'll be a company I have not long ago worked for who will go unnamed, but you can guess, who up until not too long ago were pinned to a Python 2.x. We know the rule, friends don't let friends use Python 2.x, right? Now they're going and talking to a friend of theirs who's using the latest Python packages. They can switch between Python versions. They're gonna start to wonder, why am I at company X when companies Alpha, Beta, Gamma might be a better fit for me, and I can actually express the kinds of things I want to code. So it's about them being blocked as well as them being just simply happy.
So I'm making a lot of assumptions about developers having friends. Can we just go back to Federico and then maybe Naz? Are there regulatory constraints around platforms, or are platforms an enabler for performance in a regulated environment?
That's a good question. So are there constraints around platforms? I don't think there are. I think that it depends how broad your platform is. I expect there will be none, but I think that that platforms are very much an enabler for that, right? So the level of standardization you get with platforms, the risk mitigation you get with building a platform, preventing security breaches, looking at performance bottlenecks, compliance violation, all of this comes with the platform you get there. You get more operational stability, you get consistency as well, maintenance is very low. So all of this helps solving regulation problems. Even if you think about the newest regulations all around DORA, consumer ARM, and all those ones can clearly easily be being eased up by platforms, right? The way in which we manage our microservices is consistent because we're using our platform. As a result, our DR strategy is consistent, and so it's very easy for us to solve that particular regulatory problem. We have golden paths, right? We talked about this, places where developers can go to and processes and systems that simplify adoption. And by simplifying adoption, they ensure compliance and consistency. We have all of this in place. I think that platforms, one of the core reasons why we're doing platforms in financial services is because they enable us to be faster at achieving compliance, at achieving controls, at reducing risk, which we know is part of our system. So definitely enablers for that.
Let me take a slightly different view on this one. I often took this one. I think it's necessary. I was previously at JP Morgan. JP Morgan is probably the most regulated firm on the planet outside of a government or a government agency. So every regulator globally has something to say about what they're doing. Now, when building anything, let's focus on developer platforms, but when building anything, there are an army of internal people who are like, well, you can't do that because of this regulation. You can't do that because of the other. What I prefer to do in those situations is put those guys outside of the room at the beginning. Just take those constraints away and design what we think is the most appropriate platform possible. Then bring the constraints in later. What they often found was when you looked at the net result, when you had the builders and the constraint bringers in the same room together, you ended up with this thing which was compromise over compromise over compromise. And honestly, no one was satisfied on either side. Compromises were made around some of the regulations that people have to use. And honestly, developers didn't really get a developer platform. We just managed to put a check on the roadmap that went up to the board to say that we did this. So I also think the technologists need to fight hard against some of it, really understand each of these regulations, because quite often the rule bringers don't fully understand technology platforms. So again, it comes back to the senior technologists being able to interface and build trust, understand what they're trying to regulate, and explain how either it does do what they want, or here are the edges, let's see if we can just close off one of these corners here. There has to be advocacy for these platforms and advocacy for developers.
Thanks very much, Naz. I'm just going to dip into the chat and just read a few messages from the chat because some of them are quite fun. So firstly, I think we've got a bit of a class reunion for Wayne and Naz. Which Morgan did they work at? Stay tuned. We'll find out. From Alex, as soon as the company grows to the level where it recognizes that the big folder of scripts and instructions for DevOps is worthy of being treated as a product, that's apparently when a platform emerges. Platform engineering there is an emerging technology. It's quite an interesting take. And Suri says, Leena just nailed it. Cognitive load is the mind killer. I think we'd all agree there. I'd humbly suggest, no need to be humble, mate. I'd humbly suggest that lowering the DevOps aspect of it is important, but lowering the uncertainty and noise around requirements is almost equally important. That too can become part of the platform. In other words, building the wrong thing more efficiently is still not good enough. Absolutely right. And from John, the ROI conversation needs to include economies around overheads and operating costs. Right. I hear this discussed less of the time versus developer velocity. I think we've covered that. And then Wayne, responding to Naz's point there, I think the rule bringers are also better funded and incentivized to say no and take the most conservative position. That made it very challenging for the owners of dev platforms to make happy users. I wonder, like I certainly have, and I wonder how many of the folks in the audience have been in that situation where the kind of conservative rule bringers were involved in architectural discussions very early, led to a platform or a product being built which was architecturally weird, and then later on left, moved on. We all realized that the actual truth of the regulation was much less conservative than initially we thought, and we end up having to rebuild and collect our thoughts and start again. Definitely a challenge there. I want to go back to talk about golden paths and guardrails. And Naz made this really interesting point about the kind of model of the quant developer who, in my experience, is usually a mathematician who's learned some C or some C++ in college, and then is let loose. They're kind of crowned and they're brought into a software conversation without maybe some of the more, the kind of smooth edges of software engineering, testing, CI/CD platforms. And I'm sure some of us have been in the situation of having to go and mop up and type loose ends after those folks. So how do you go about designing the so-called paved path, the golden path that allows most people to do the right thing most of the time, but still leaves room for experts to go and do their thing as well? Federico, maybe we could hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, totally. So in my way, the way in which you try to solve this problem is to give both a carrot and a stick. So the way is you define golden paths that are that people are incentivized to adopt. Maybe they're incentivized to adopting that because they know that there's a very big architectural review process within the org, and if you use the golden path, you don't have to go through it. Maybe they are adopting it because they know that if they adopt that, they also get, all the services they get to use a nice database recovery system. They can connect to the internet. They have all of these set of controls that apply to them that are way more lax because they have that and they don't have to prove anything. So you have to create a golden path that enable an easy path and path of least resistance within the company to get all the good things about it. At the same time, you have to allow your users, your more advanced users, the ones who have hedge requirements, that have niche requirements, the ones who have, all the specific things, to have an escape hatchet. So these guys need to be able to go out and build their own things without the golden path. We don't want to have shadow IT. We don't want them to say no, and then they're doing it anyway somewhere else. We want them to be able to still remain within the guardrails of the company, deploy their things without using a golden path, but at that point, they will have to pay the price of it. So they will have to go through that burdensome architectural review process. They will have to justify maybe the cost of their new system in front of a larger audience. Maybe they will need to talk with security again and have that checkbox done by security. They will have to do that threat assessment. So the idea for me is define golden path and incentivize developer, give them that carrot and systems and processes so that they can use them. And that is the path of least resistance with all the existing platform services. But also give them enough leeway for them to be able to go aside the golden path, follow their own journey, understanding though that there's a price to be paid in terms of compliance, security, and all the other requirements. They still apply. That's the important thing. If the golden path requires 10 in terms of security, then the non-golden path will require 40, but they apply it in both cases. That's the important thing. So golden path and the escape hatch next to them. That is how I think about that. I reason with that.
Excellent. Leena, how do you find the balance between enforcing patterns and allowing, edge cases?
Absolutely. I'm kind of completely aligned with Federico. So certainly from my perspective, I always think that platform is there for the 80%. So we're there for the common use paths, so the common use cases, and to help kind of engineers again, kind of just get started, get up and running really quickly, where everything is compliant. You're hitting all the security points, you're hitting all the compliance points, and you get all of that out of the box. The trade-off is obviously it's a little bit less flexible, but you're on a path where all your infrastructure is maintained, and really all you need to think about as an engineer is your code and your logic. There's always that 20%, perhaps probably a little bit less, that might need a slightly different stack than the one the platform is aligning on. And absolutely within the guardrails of an organization, I would absolutely expect these teams, if it was justified, to build and own potentially their own stack and their own structure and their own code. But like Federico said, there is a trade-off, right? They have to look after it. They have to maintain it. They have to keep it compliant with the organization's security guidelines and compliance guidelines. So golden paths are super helpful for getting up and running and getting your code out really quickly hopefully with minimal effort. But yeah, absolutely. I think there's always a case for providing a little bit of flexibility.
I think the carrot and the stick is really well defined, and it's a really nice way to frame the conversation. It reminds me of that conversation we always have in the software engineering field about the kind of the brilliant ass who doesn't like using frameworks, right? Like a software framework like Spring. Like there are those people who want to build infrastructure, they want to build architecture, they want to go it alone, they don't like being told what to do, they don't like being, fenced in. And in my experience, partly that's the management discussion. That's just leadership, right? There are rules of the road. But in the chat, Gordon's got a really interesting way of framing this, and I'm just going to read this message. As a platform engineer, I guess it's a question. How do you balance front-end simplicity for semi-technical users with the risk of over-engineering complex back-end solutions? So I guess rather than the 80-20 rule, that's a question about the kind of technical depth, I guess, or the technical nous of the user. Maybe Naz, as a software leader, you've got some thoughts there.
I said it before, I'll just mention it again. We just have to be honest that we know that developers fall into different quartiles with their skill, experience, and so on. We just have to, we know that is the case. For me, really, the key thing here is similar to as Sam was saying with the carrot and the stick. I like the principle of make it easy to do the right thing, hard to do the wrong thing. So we're often talking about the line is exactly here and the line is exactly there, and do whatever you want in the middle. We can actually make it easier and better for them to do good things. I'll give you an example. Sam remembers this. And in fact, I think Sam's calling me out when he talks about mathematicians who learn how to code accidentally and then go and write a bunch of trash, which was me. Then you learn over time. So back in the day, what did we all do? We built monoliths. And then about 15 years ago, there was, everyone was like, oh, we should have microservices. They're going to be absolutely brilliant. And they will solve all problems and they will have no downsides. What do we find? They have a ton of downsides. You're in version hell. You don't know what connects to what. Deployments are a nightmare. And some might disagree. I feel the optimal model is the monorepo. What I found is a lot of these developer tool suites don't have great support for builds on monorepos. So I don't want to tell people broadly across an organization, unless I run it, you want to use a monorepo. I will tell my subset of the organization, I need you to be using monorepos unless there's a better reason not to. But from a central infrastructure point of view, supporting the monorepo allows those who are seeing the benefits that other groups are getting to migrate away from either the monolith or the micro services to the monorepo. So, and it all comes back down again to the level of knowledge that someone has. As humans, we look for shortcuts. We see the grass moving and we hear a noise, might be a snake. Right? We don't know if it's a snake or not, but we take that shortcut. If we are setting up these paths that allow those who may not have all the knowledge in a domain to have a good opinionated choice, you'll see the organization is better overall.
Absolutely. And I would
really nice. Go ahead, Leena.
Oh, sorry. I would lean into that phrase about making the right thing the easiest thing to do. And conversely, it also works, right? So if you one of the really interesting things about platform engineering, another really interesting thing is the behavioral science part of platform engineering. So just as you can make the right thing the easiest thing to do, you can also discourage certain behavior by introducing friction. So, introduce a couple of little hurdles to make it painful enough that your engineers will consider using the paved path and going the way that perhaps the engineering leadership want engineering to proceed in that organization. I think particularly in highly regulated organizations.
Can I just?
I'm sorry. Yes, and then we've got a question from Anthony. So Federico, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I was just trying to answer Gordon's question, right? So how do you balance front-end simplicity for semi-technical users? So I was trying to think about this. So I think there are a few options there. So first of all, I would say look at your users and say which ones are your experienced users and what do they need, and which ones are your non-experienced users and what do they need. So define the personas, and maybe it's a case of creating two solutions for the same platforms for two different personas. That's the first thing. The second thing I was thinking about is that it's probably not black and white. So as opposed to giving everybody the flexibility of writing code from scratch, maybe there's a YAML file, there's a piece of configuration or a DSL that you can use as a common ground for developers and non-developers to be able to talk the same language. The big fear there is clearly somebody creating something is very hard to maintain over time and is really burdensome to maintain over time and has a clear cost attached to it. You can mitigate that risk in different ways. You can mitigate the risk as you stop them from doing it, or at the beginning, you mitigate the risk saying, here is, if you want to do it that way, fair enough, but you also have to define your own maintenance model or maintenance project, the way in which you're going to do the maintenance there, and the cost model attached to it as well. So I would say give people flexibility, create maybe two different golden paths for different levels of experience of users, maybe using DSLs, YAMLs, that kind of stuff that can help people easing things up and thinking about de-risking the activity by defining maintenance and cost models at the beginning of the project as opposed to just at the end and having them there, just like some ideas there.
Great point. Great multiple golden paths for different levels of expertise and different levels of buy-in. Anthony, let's hear from you. You've had your hand up for a minute.
Hi, folks. First of all, great session so far. Many thanks for everything. So I think that I'm basically complimenting and asking a question that Leena can't hear anymore, because I always ask like a variation of that every time that we meet. But I feel like platforms are often formed, Kent divides companies in like exploration phase, like small startups, then like explosion with everything is about scalability, and then exploitation kind of thing when you're basically, you own the market, right? And platforms generally are built at the end of the exploration, beginning of the expansion phase. So you have like your founders engineers that are used to do whatever they want. And as much as we say that it's about building roads, like you said, guardrails and compliance and like standardization are main business concerns that have to be addressed. So some things, there will be some slowdown on one side to speed up on others. And then there's folks like NAS, I share common former employers with them. And you have to convince like developers that yes, if you want to install the latest version of Maven, there is this open source path with like Chocolate. So I became a maintainer of like a package that has over 1 million downloads, so that I could install Maven on my own machine, and that was the platform solution to the problem, right? So it's hard to sell to a startup guy, a founding engineer, this sort of thing. And you can not say that, no, this doesn't exist and there will not be rules as well. So basically help an architect here. How do we sell, how do we sell platforms for like for companies that are getting started?
I think that's super interesting, but I go back to the fact that I think every engineering org has a platform, whether it's a good one, whether it's a big one, whether it's a useful platform, it's there. There are conventional ways of building that develop over time. And appreciate that not every stage of company growth is appropriate to have a dedicated team. But perhaps if you can start, as the organization is going from startup to, perhaps a scale up, having that sort of mindset in, at the forefront really helps kind of thinking about, what do we want to focus on? Do we want to have a specific set of technologies that we can align on, rather than having this technical sprawl that when you do eventually, or if you do eventually have a platform team, their first job is going to be trying to get some alignment so that they can build a platform on it. So I think certainly having a platform ideology and a platform mindset certainly helps getting that started.
As you in a smaller organization, but one which is in a highly regulated space, how do you begin to talk about the payoff of introducing platforms?
Here's the nice thing. I'm in private equity. We are not really regulated at all, but I have the experience of JP Morgan, which was the most highly regulated ever. And then we were at Morgan Stanley back in the day. And actually, this was prior to there being a whole heap of regulation. It kind of came in as we did. I mean, I made my point before about I really want regulation people to the side, but you bring them in at the right point in the evolution of the platform build. I don't know how there's an easy way to bridge the gap without there being shared understanding and knowledge. So I think someone made this point before that the regulation people were better funded. I think that might be the case, but I think there was more to it. I think there is a hierarchy within financial services firms where the person that quotes such and such Basel Act 3, Section 4, subsection 2, subsection C says blah, well, that wins the argument. Well, no, it doesn't, because that person needs to understand what a CI build in GitHub actually means in order to see if that regulation truly applies to doing what they need to know what a build is. And this is why I think, again, it comes to having your senior technology be close enough to technology to have strong enough relationships with these folks and to act as equals in order to go and have an honest debate.
Thanks, Naz. While you're on a roll, there was a question in the chat that you wanted to address from Maz, who asked about how we evolve those golden paths.
And it's a brilliant question, because sometimes what happens is we go through this massive exercise, a year or two, we set up 3 golden paths, and then it's set in stone, right? It's written on 2 tablets from Mount Sinai, and everyone does what their father before them and their father before them did, and no one remembers why. There has to be an evolution mechanism. Now, I'll give you a great example from my previous role. Everyone buys, let's say they buy, that we should have the latest certified version of Python installed on the developer's machine. They have all the patches and they're good to go. And we probably agree a few years ago, they should use PyLint, they should use ISOR. There's all the standard tools to keep your code clean. That's not the future. The future is the suite of tools that the folks at Astral came out with. UV, Rough. This is the modern way of doing it. You no longer need a single version of Python. You can switch between them, between certain versions that we agree as an organization are good. Don't have all of the linting tools. Rough does it all. It's super fast, written in Rust, and so on. Now, Sam knows me. We just went and did this in my organization, and we worked around the build system. And eventually, I convinced folks that this should be an additive thing in the path. But here's what happens. And folks need to be really aware of this. Quite often, folks in infrastructure land aren't building applications. So they're not experiencing the daily pain that the developers are having in order to evolve to that next stage in the same way we went from null to the initial developer platform. So there has to be this trusted feedback loop such that they are, I would say they have more knowledge about how to build platforms, but they don't have enough knowledge about the pain in building applications. That needs to be able to be fed back in.
Really interesting point there about the people who built the platform felt the pain of what was there before the platform when it was a set of build scripts and all the rest of it. My spider sense is tingling because it feels like by moving to the next great thing, the way things should be done now, you've introduced another config file to the repo. And now, and that's just killing me, Smalls.
If I may add something on this as well. So I think that like the solution to that is to think about owners for platform services clearly, right? So the idea of the Python example there, you would have an application engineering team that is responsible for the way in which we adopt Python within the company, and they are the ones that come up with a standard way of adopting it, including the linter that everybody uses within the org. And then you can advocate that policy there. But having platform owners that offer platform offerings and keeping those offerings up to date is a very important thing. It's probably the strategic solution to the problem. So thinking about this over a long period of time, as opposed to just creating things that nobody maintains, having a clear set of platform offerings that are maintained by different teams, and people know who maintains what, is probably a good way of approaching this.
And to go back to Anthony's, if I can just draw back to Anthony's point about small businesses, startups, that's likely to be a hat that someone wears. It's a role that someone has, maybe rather than an individual job. Leena, please make your final point, and then we're going to talk about data platforms.
I was just going to say that day 2 is certainly still a hot topic in platform engineering. we spend a lot of time kind of helping engineers kind of create new services or create new code, but we also have to help them upgrade and move on, move the existing code on. It's not just using the paved paths or the golden paths to create. We also have to help them maintain.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, folks. I want to talk about data platforms for a little bit. We spent a lot of time, we use the word platforms, and then we've just dived straight into developer platforms, how we enable developers to develop. I want to hear from Federico about how you use platforms to unlock data inside organizations.
Yeah, fair enough. So I've worked with, in my time in consultancy, I've worked building data platforms for a variety of different companies. And my experience there is the fact that, and I think why this is very relevant, the fact that the bar in cloud data platform has changed dramatically in a very short period of time. I think that whether 10 years ago, anybody who had a data warehouse with some sort of data visualization tool on top of the data warehouse, we're already in the top 10% of companies, top 20% of companies, and they had a standardized way of approaching this. Right now, the bar for modern financial service data platform is way, way higher. Companies right now either buy, off-the-shelf solutions that contain a number of things, so they go and build out of open source. But everything from centralized to decentralized data ownership is getting a big attraction right now. Data mesh, data fabric are terms that are getting super popular right now. But in a larger company, a data mesh is an enormous change, both from a process as well as a systems perspective. In a similar way, if you think about data ontology as well, semantic layers, data lineage, these were 5 years ago only available for the very top 10% of companies. Right now is a requirement for everybody to have. Governance policies, data catalogs in data and Delta lakes, security and privacy by design, all the requirements that came off GDPR a few years ago that now are part of our systems as well, having to deal with all that. So I want to draw your attention on how dramatically the cloud data platform world has changed right now, and platforms has gone into that, and the way in which then our users of the platform, data scientists, data analysts are using the platform is a problem that is similar to a quant who has a strong mathematics background, but maybe not as a strong computer science background. Is a similar set of problems right now, and companies are trying to solve this in a very complex way, and this has changed dramatically over the past 4 to 5 years. I think it's a very interesting space to be right now there. So many.
Absolutely. Naz is hovering off mute. So Naz, what you made an interesting point about how data has kind of shifted from being maybe a side effect to something which can be a key business driver. Can you expand on that for a minute?
Yeah, I often joke I spent the first half of my career leaving data all over the place, and the second half picking it up and trying to do useful things with it. Look, there's been a massive evolution in this space, and I've actually lived it for the past 10 years. If we go back past that, and you're going to see a pendulum effect, like we see Tories to Labour and back, you've seen this pendulum effect here as well. If you think about the terminal, we had thick client, then thin client, then thick client, then thin client. We're going back and forth with the cloud on this still. So what happened with data? If we go back to the early days of Hadoop, please no one vomit, we really had these free-form data lakes. Anyone threw anything they wanted into there. There was no tabular structure. Isn't it funny? We're kind of a little bit getting back to that now, but through an evolution. Hadoop, everyone got rid of, and everyone went to Spark, and everyone's writing custom jobs, which in some way were working with tabular data. We then realized that row-based is not very good for the things we want to do and the scale that things are going to, and columnar comes along. And you have to give great credit to the Arrow folks who realized that text-based processing is not going to work, and they did all of the work to do columnar binary-based processing. So we've seen this massive evolution over to that side. It's all changed again. And it might be that we're a little bit lucky with some of the things that we were doing before in the new world. So there was a bunch of people spending time on ontology. It fell a little bit out of favor because no one was really using it much. Right? I know, sorry for ontology folks, there was a time where you're putting all the work in to do all the ontological definitions, and then it was driving a bit of config on some front end to go and do things. I think it's all about to change. I might be jumping forward, but I look at the time and we're probably all right here. with the the massive step in how LLMs are able to process text, having that kind of ontological definition on our data is about to unlock the next phase. Previously, ontology was really just to organize data and to allow folks who are regulating things to know that this is over here and that is over there. I think we're about to come to that next step of really unlocking what's in our data if we do one key thing. If we don't just use RAG. So everyone that's taking all of their data, creating embeddings, throwing it all at an LLM and hoping for the best, I don't think we'll do quite as well as those who have used that ontology, have gone and revised it to make it suitable for LLMs to start to answer questions. I think that's the next unlock, and that's where we're going to see our data go to the next level.
Thanks, Naz. We will, as is compulsory, we will be talking about AI, but I'm hoping to contain it to the last 4 minutes of this session. So maybe we could talk. We could hear from Leena about data platforms, and in particular, I think there's a point that in financial services we like to think that we are at the bleeding edge and leading the fray. Is there anything that we can learn from other industries about our use of data platforms or standardization of platforms where maybe we can just approach with a bit of humility and sit and listen?
Can I jump in there first? So
if you're going to say no.
So I don't think we were. So if we go back to when I started, let's say at Morgan Stanley, so in the early 2000s, we were the cutting edge of technology, but we didn't realize there was a revolution going on the west coast of the US. It was happening quietly and behind our backs. Google had gone and built internally the Google file system. They had done the underpinnings for what would later become MapReduce and Hadoop. We hadn't seen this. Remember the old CTO, Sam, at Morgan Stanley used to say that the bottleneck of every system we have is the database, right? And we've spent the last 4 decades just working around that bottleneck. They accelerated in the first decade of the century, past us, and honestly, financial services has never caught up. So there's my thought.
Thanks, Naz. Later.
I'd say my experience is mostly with development platforms rather than data platforms, but I would say certainly with data platforms, it's just trying to kind of approach it with the same kind of platform as a product mindset and look for the features and the abstractions that you can actually develop and look for opportunities for reducing that cognitive load and providing all that information in a much more kind of digestible and accessible way, which I find sometimes with data platforms is not that easy. It's very disparate and it's very difficult to find.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. All right, folks, it's that time of the session. So if everyone puts on their AI LLM discussion hat, my thinking about how AI is used in platforms, is it anything more than someone just applying a LLM chatbot to help you onboard or to help you start a new database? Is there anything that's deeper? Maybe we could hear from Federico.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind clearly is the LLM as a service, as a platform service, right? So like companies, as a company, we're adopting LLMs. We're thinking about how to adopt that. I think that there should be a platform offering within the company that allows us to use them in a standardized way. If you think about this, if you abstract yourself, like right now, even the most advanced players, OpenAI with ChatGPT, they don't have large governance controls that would adapt to companies for which you can have an architectural function that says, here is how we use ChatGPT within our org, set a set of controls to ChatGPT, and then have teams using it directly. So we need the control, we need processes around this. We have to build them internally. There needs to be a platform offering around that. I think that is the first step. Then how we use LLMs within the platform as well. I think that the way in which LLMs and AI are coming in are very much structural as opposed to cyclical for software engineering. So in this sense, I think the developer experience should look at this. I think we look at engineering enablement as well. Like what are the AI tools that we see are being adopted in the company, from Cloud Code to Gemini and all the agents and the assistants there. We should have a platform offering that includes that and teaches people within the org what is available out there. There's so much context that having somebody within the company that understands the context, understands the organizational constraints, and create an offering, I think is essential for that. That is
super powerful. Yeah, thank you. Super powerful. Naz, let's have final thoughts from you.
Yeah. So I think what a lot of folks are doing is they're conflating AI with LLMs. If I was to draw the Venn diagram, I have the Venn diagram of AI, and LLMs are a circle, a subset of that. So what are the possible things that you can do in the AI space? You have the non-technical user on one end, and they're using a chatbot, which happens to be using a foundational or open source LLM, potentially with a bunch of agents on the back end. The next level, we have developers whom, and this is what was just being spoken about, we give access to these LLMs such that they can, within their code, be able to interact. And maybe that satisfies use case one that I have there. The next, we may want to, we're going to have machine learning developers, and they're going to do two things. They don't just use LLMs. There has been decades of machine learning that was done prior to LLMs, and it works really, really, really well. People want to do random forests. They want to do an HDB scan. They want to do different forms of hierarchical clustering. They've got all sorts of things they want to do. We need to make sure that the platforms have the tools that they need in order to be able to do that. And it's not that hard. It's scikit-learn and the correct NVIDIA drivers installed on that machine. The next level, and it really depends on your organization, but there's going to be a race here, and we'll see if this actually happens. The foundational models are getting very good. The large language models that are open source are getting very good. The small language models are getting very good. The need for fine-tuning is becoming less and less. If your organization finds it has to do that, if there's a particular vernacular that's used within yours, I'll give you an example from banking. If you ever heard FX traders talking, it doesn't even sound like English, right? They're using a bunch of words that no one seems to understand. We used to need fine-tuning in order to be able to get the machines to understand them, but it doesn't seem to happen so much anymore. So fine-tuning may go away. And then I don't know that anyone here is training foundational models from scratch, so we can just scratch that because I don't know $100 billion. But there's a lot in the middle between someone using a chatbot and people getting the most out of what machine learning libraries and mathematics that have been proven provide.
Great final thoughts there. Thanks very much, Naz. And that's been our show, folks. Leena has already had to drop off, so I'll say thanks to her in her absence. We've also had Naz Quadri and Federico Fregosi. I've been Sam Moorhouse. Thanks very much to our panelists and to you all for dialing in today. And I'll hand over to Barry for his final thoughts.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks again to the panelists, and thanks obviously to Sam. We're looking to build a bit of a series of this. I think this is number 5, maybe number 6. So would love to hear from each of you. What do you want to hear from next? Would you like to have a seat on the panel for an upcoming session? If you'd like to get a bit more involved in helping us steer the future events, then please do let us know. Obviously, you've got everyone's LinkedIn details on that document. So if you haven't opened that document, scroll up through the chat and click it now. Got about 5 seconds to do that. So you've got everyone's LinkedIn on there, so you can connect with afterwards. Federico, Naz, Sam, yours are already on there, so people should be connecting with you directly. But no, other than that, thanks everyone for coming along and for staying here, and we will see you at the next one. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.